Okay, I will call to order the special City Council work session, the Wilsonville City Council of October 9th, 2025 at 3 p.m. Take it away.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to meet in midday. I know this is a special work session meeting for you all. And we're here today to talk about the city manager recruitment. And we have here, he'll talk a little bit more about his background in a second, Richard Myers, who is a consultant from GMP Consultants, who is contracted to help us out with the city manager recruitment. So I'm going to let him talk more about that process and what we are going to be seeking from you in this meeting today. Okay?
Well, thank you for having me here.
Oh, no, wrong one. Sorry.
There we go. Thank you for having me here and being a part of this. This is wonderful. This is pretty high tech. I don't have this one. I've been retired a little while, but I didn't have all this. Yes. I'm a retired city manager. I was the city manager in Cottage Grove for 26 years. Before that, I was down on the southern coast in Myrtle Point for 7, and then moved back to Oregon to do that, and had been working for the League of Cities in Arizona for a couple of years, and the city of Orem in Utah. So I've had some experience with local government and city management, and after retirement, just find it fun to help and to work a little bit more in doing these recruitments for GMP. And so I'm happy to be here and excited for the opportunity to help you find that city manager that you want and need for the future. That's me. In a nutshell, I spend a lot of time at home in my 135-year-old house. We just redid the kitchen and a bunch of other things this last summer. So that's my other hobby that I get to do as retired. Tonight, or this afternoon, what we wanted to do was kind of get things kicked off and get started on preparing our documents and materials so that we can actually have the type of recruitment you want as we get closer to the final selection. One of the things in Oregon and in many states, the laws regarding executive session and how to do recruitments and hiring and interviews, we want to make sure we comply with all that. And so how that happens is we do it up front, and we try to do everything we can up front so that as we get towards the end, the decisions have been made or some basic parameters have been laid out that we can then use as the base, and we'll have you actually do and adopt a resolution just like you did for the city attorney that basically says here's what the process is, here's the things we're going to look at, the criterias, the type of people we're going to be doing, and a base overview of what the recruitment process is going to look like so that as we move through the process, we can do some of those things in executive session, especially the interviews. Because for city managers that are currently employed, they generally don't like to be too out in the public until they get to the point where they're a finalist, because they don't want their current employer to really get upset or people in the community to be upset that they're looking for other jobs. And that's what happens. And they try to keep it a little quiet until they get to a point where now we need to make it public. So that's what we do, and try to help set that up and work closely. I think we'll be working closely with your attorney to make sure that everything that we're doing, she can defend, because that's what's important. We're not going to defend it. She needs to. So we want to make sure that that's how that moves forward. So tonight, or today, wanted to kind of kick off first talking about the schedule. And how long this may take. We had information from the proposal that wanted it by January 2nd or January 5th. That's pretty ambitious, especially with the holiday seasons that are going to be in November and December. We basically lose 3 weeks of those 3 months coming up that just disappear off the calendar. People don't respond during those times. They're not available during those times. Travel costs go up. All kinds of things happen during November and December that just we can't work around. We could, and up on the screen you have the blue version of the schedule. And I'll kind of step through that just really briefly to kind of give you an idea of how we go through the process, and then we'll talk about each one of those a little more in detail and some of the information we need as we put this together. We've had the kickoff meeting. This is with Andrea and our staff. We met, talked about the schedule, and put this together. The next step is the profile development, and tonight we'll probably do a little bit of some of the background work to help that get that started.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Couple things. And I'm not speaking for the entire council, but I can speak for me. There is no ambitious deadline, but the one to get it right.
Good.
And I don't understand the thought process that there was a deadline. If necessary, at least on my one vote on council, I will raise a motion or ask a motion to put in place an interim city manager if we're thinking the deadline is the end of the contract of the existing city manager.
So if we want to go with that, then we'd look at the green schedule. And I can point out some of the differences in the two schedules. The green schedule is where we feel most comfortable in being able to go through the process and not cut some corners. Because you do want to get this right. This is expensive. You don't want to do it again. It's a burden for finances to go through the recruitment process. It's also, it impacts staff. It impacts the council. It impacts the community as you're going through this change. And so you don't want to do it wrong. We want to find you that one person that's the right one for Wilsonville. So we'll look at the green one and use that one as here's where we're going. And I'll point out some of the differences. So we're in the profile development, and basically that's the first piece, and that's where we create the really colorful brochure that is a sales piece for Wilsonville. We send that out, we mail that out everywhere. It's electronically triggered, all these different places, so that this makes people want to apply for the position, especially giving those managers or candidates the opportunity to see what kind of community is there and whether they match. And I'll say this because this is how I used to do it, and I know a lot of managers do. They don't apply for something that they don't fit in.
Do you mind if I interrupt again?
Fine. Anytime.
The profile development piece, I just want quick answers. Who are the key stakeholders that you think the meeting will be with?
That's a question that I was going to ask the council.
So here are my thoughts. Okay. For me, for my thought process, that in order for this to be a transparent and fair process, I'm going to hypothetically think that there may be both internal and external interest in the process. And so in order for it to be fair, I think staff should play no role whatsoever in the process at all, other than the city attorney, because the city attorney's office has an independent duty separate from the city manager and has a shield and is ethically bound. So that's my view. Here's why. Because if we are to consider an internal candidate ever, and they're chosen, they're going to lose all credibility by the community because there was a perception that wasn't a process that allowed a fair playing field. So my viewpoint is that we want a process that both internal and external candidates have an equal playing field. So I can't speak for the rest of the council, but that's my view.
Yeah. And so what we use the stakeholders for in this part of the process is to help identify those issues that are before the community and in the city, and the challenges and opportunities that are there, and to get a sense of what kind of atmosphere is in the workplace as well as in the community. So at this point, the stakeholders really don't have any role to play other than providing information about the community and the work environment. And then that goes into creating the materials that help convey that look. The council gets, and as part of the process to effectively get to an executive session later on, you'll have to adopt the profile. So we'll draft it out based on all this information, and then you'll have the time to edit and change or say, no, we don't want that one in there because that's not a top priority. We want this other thing in first, and be able to edit and change that and approve it. And that becomes some of the documents that we then use to show, hey, this went through a process. The public, others, everyone had an opportunity to have some say in this. Other stakeholders, and it is common for communities, cities to use some staff in the stakeholder process. And even when you move into the interviews on an interview panel, we recommend that it not be a whole panel of all of the department heads because, like you say, there may be some perception of not being fair for external or internal. Typically what we find, though, is the internal candidate gets massacred if it's a panel of all local in-staff stakeholders. Why that is, we think it has something to do with they want to see perfection and they want it to be perfect, and nobody is perfect to be their superior. And so we try to encourage that if you do use staff, that they're tempered with other stakeholders, people from the school district, superintendents, anybody who works with the position of city manager or has some kind of working relationship. Those are really the important stakeholders. Representatives from the county commission or from your legislator or from we've even had some that have used people from the office of their congressional delegation that regularly work with the city manager. Other organizations, the COGs, the Metros, whatever, have somebody in on that stakeholder part in the panels because they have that interaction and they work with the manager on a daily basis or somewhat regular basis. So those are the external ones. Typically, we don't see a lot of cities use just general public for the stakeholder panel interviews because it's the interviews are typically going to be a little more geared to that professional, what are their qualifications and character traits there. To bring the public in a little more in that process, as you get down to the finalists, and we make the finalists publicly known, that we have a meet and greet. And members of the community can come and meet and mingle, and some of them have had little snacks and stuff like that. They meet and mingle, and then there's comment cards, and they can write down, hey, this person was really personable. I found it easy to talk to, or don't hire this one. I mean, and a variety of reasons. Way back when I applied for a position on the coast, one of the comment cards came back for me in that position that, yeah, the other applicant's wife is better looking. And that actually came out in the newspaper. It was the editor from the paper that wrote that. And my wife didn't care for it very much, but we kind of laughed about that, and we didn't get that job, so that was okay.
I think your process is consistent with what I understood happened 10 plus years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So the profile and the stakeholders we do now is basically we'll do interviews, and a lot of those stakeholders we won't use in the interview panels. I mean, unless you want to. But those stakeholders are to just gather information so we can prepare a really good guide of what the community's like. And how there's an interaction between the different organizations in the community. For example, in LeGrand, I met with the president from the university there in LeGrand. What's the relationship between the university and the city, and how do you see it changing? What would you like to see in the future? What was good about the current relationship? And those kind of things help make that profile better so that we can go out and there may be a manager that has been in or wants to be in a community with a higher education facility, and how does that tie in? So those are the purposes of those initial stakeholders. After we do the profile, the council will have an opportunity to approve that. And as I said, it'll be part of that resolution and create that, here's the criteria, here are the basic requirements, here are the things we're looking for, so that we're able to then go in and do interviews in an executive level, executive session. We'll then launch it, and after the approval's made, we'll turn around and launch that and send it out. We mail it, we email it, it goes all over the place. We post it on a number of job boards all over. Typically, our email blast goes out to, for city managers, I think over 2,000 emails there. If there is any, and at this point, if there's any local boards or advertisements or things that you want, we will add those into the mix as well. And our request is that 4 weeks is what we consider the minimum. The blue schedule has it at 3, so our green one here has it at, I believe, 5 weeks almost, and that's what we would suggest would be ideal. If you go less than 4, if you go 3 weeks, that sends a message to the candidates that you're rushing it, number one. Number two, that there may be an internal candidate that is the blessed candidate. And so it's just a real quick, we're doing this to satisfy requirements. If you go the full 5 weeks, that sends a message to the candidates. They're seriously considering, they want to see applications from everyone who is possibly qualified. And so that's where we've seen those differences happen, how that psychologically goes into the candidates' heads, whether it's subliminal or something that happens there, but we see that. Oregon's been having about 24, 25 applicants, the last few that I've done. Washington has started hitting 80. We may hit a higher number. That's good for you. As I screen those 80 and get rid of the tractor supply store manager and the bank manager and the hotel manager that are applying for a city management position that haven't got any of the qualifications that you're looking for, screen those out. It does give us more that we do the semi-finalist interviews on. So I will interview, and depending on the number of applicants we get, up to 20 some applicants, I will interview those and use the information from the profile and the information we've gathered to screen those out and bring you the top 5, 6, 7. And we'll rate and show you how some of the others scored in there. So that the council then will sit down in the work session that's scheduled after those interviews are complete. And this would be done about in January 4th, that week of January 4th. We would then bring you back, here are the semifinalists, these are the ones we interviewed, here are the ones we recommend. Here are some that you might consider. Here are some that have some problems that we were able to discover. At that point, you will decide how many you want to interview in the final interviews. Typically, it's 5 or 6, sometimes 4. Some cities take a little longer to decide how many they want to interview, and then when they select their 5, they find out that 2 of them already have a job that they've gotten a new job for. So we encourage some quickness as we look at those so that we don't lose some of the good candidates. Then we start preparing everything for the final interviews. On the blue sheet, we turn around and do the final interviews as quickly as we can. We have, on the green sheet, we take about 2 weeks, and we do a background check. We hire a company that does a background check for it, and we also get references, and we collect reference information. The shortened one cuts that out, and when you do the interviews and actually offer the job, it will be contingent on successful, satisfactory background and reference check. We don't recommend that. This is a public position that's going to be out there. People are going to be following it. And if you select a candidate and say, this is pending the background investigation, and then all of a sudden the background investigation comes out and it's not good, that doesn't look good. So we'd rather have that information ahead of time so that we don't have that kind of look happen for the community. It's just not something that we like to have happen. So, and then on the green schedule, we believe that on about the 25th of January would be a good time for the final interviews, get that conducted. If the candidates aren't employed right now, you could see that happen rather quickly, where if you select one, they could be on. But with the final interviews, if those candidates or one of the candidates you select as the prime one has a job, you're going to be looking at another 2 months probably where they have to give notice. And
Question, is this the time to ask about this process, or is this going to be further refined later? Because I have a number of things, like you're going to do the one-on-one interviews, you're going to screen out. Are those going to be recorded? And if so, can we as a council, any member of council, ask for an opportunity to look at those to make an assessment of our own if there was someone that we might have thought differently?
Great question. We don't record it, but what I do is I take notes and then I provide all the notes for all those interviews to the council. So you'll have a complete list of the notes. We do a Google search on them. So you'll have more information there on each of those candidates, even the ones that I don't recommend. And I'll actually go through and say, here are the reasons why I don't. This candidate was a manager. He lost his job because he said something in a termination interview with the police chief that was racially bad. And the police chief taped the conversation, and counselors heard it and the paper heard it. And if you hire this person, they've actually had some of the people in the community say they're going to come and follow him. You don't want to touch that. So I'll have all of that detail in there. That's why we do that in an executive session and go through that, because there is sensitive material in there that we want to share. And some of those people are currently employed as managers that, hey, here's where this person doesn't fit you.
And they have a due process right on their reputation.
Yeah, and we don't want to damage that. Other question?
No, that's all right.
So great question. That's exactly, and I should have mentioned the notes, but we bring those notes back to that executive work session and go through those. And I've actually had a couple of cities where they've said, what happened is by the time we got to the work session, one of the candidates got hired somewhere. And so we went through the notes and they pulled somebody else up and put them in based on those notes and comments. So that's the recommended is the green, and that's one we'd like to follow. I think it gives you the best opportunity. It does mean you're probably going to be without a manager for at least the end of January, but it's more likely, depending on where that manager is coming from, would be March starting or March or April start.
Historically, Wilsonville has had an interim, and we've taken our time. So as far as like,
and we can help you with that. We have some possible names that we know about in the community that are in Oregon that are doing that kind of work. The league has a list as well, and so those are possible, and it's not uncommon. That's it in a rough nutshell, and now I want to kind of go through a little bit more in some of the details. One of the things in the profile is the job description, and Andrea sent you out a copy of the job description that the city currently has for the city manager position, and we will refer to that on the profile as, here's one of the documents. This is the specifics that.
can I have a question asked now of staff? So this was revised on May 1st, 2025. So who revised it?
I wrote the job description, and
Okay.
that was the job description that I included in some council meetings that we held, I think, back in May.
Okay, and question is, who was a part of the process to draft that outside you? Was there anybody else that looked at it?
So I drafted it, and then I sent it to Brian to look over to see if it was in line with what he felt his job was, and then brought it to you all.
Okay, great. And then do you have a potential copy of the one that occurred 10 plus years ago before Brian, so we can have a comparison? I don't need it today, but I'd like to see what that was. I also would like to see, if I can, a copy of anything that LOC has generated or other neighboring cities, so I have a comparison of that,
Sure.
and that would help me. Or if you have drafts and your involvement, just to see what that job description looks like, so I can, that I don't have. And
So I can make a note here to send that to council. I'll send the previous profile. I actually don't believe there was a job description.
Okay, that's good to know.
I'll double check, but I'm not sure that there was a job description. I
I'm
know there
glad we
was a
have one now.
profile. Yes. And then I will look and see if LOC has a draft sample or also ICMA.
Okay, like we can also reach out to
I can look at
Tualatin
other cities as
and
well.
the other cities, regional cities. Okay, great, thanks.
Mayor?
Mayor.
Council President Barry has a question.
Okay, thank you. Council President Barrett?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation so far. What I've heard so far about the green schedule, it sounds pretty good. I do have two questions. So in January, if we are without a city manager, because we haven't filled that position yet, do we have anything coming up on the calendar for January and February that might be a concern? And then also, for the interim city manager, can that be filled from somebody within the city council, like the assistant city manager, or is it more normal to go outside and pull somebody in for that temporary time where we need somebody to do those jobs?
The answer is yes. I mean, it can be the assistant, it can be, cities have done the city attorney, just to throw that at you.
She's actually volunteering now, right? No, just kidding.
It's been department heads. It's rotated among department heads. I know some cities have done that. And it's been external. So a former city manager from, there was one city that actually had a former city manager from that city come back after 20 years and served as the interim for the 2-3 months while the recruitment was going on. So, I mean, that's something you can do.
Historically, in our past one, we had an internal assistant city manager that did that in interim process, and it went, as I understand, well. So I don't think we'll have a problem, but I can't speak for the entire council. So.
I think that is always an option. We also have a position that is vacant in the community development department right now, for which the assistant city manager is filling in. So we just might want to think about the how that would work with all of those departments.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and look carefully at what you've got on staff and what kind of burdens that's going to create. Maybe that's why some cities go to the city attorney, because they don't.
I'm looking at it right now.
But the other thing to think about is you may have an internal candidate that's applied for the position, and is that person somebody you want to have as an interim or not? What does that send to other candidates as a message if they're serving there? It's happened and people have done it, but it's just one to think about.
Good point.
And I would be extremely hesitant to have that be the case. I think it needs to be a clean slate, that every candidate that we look at doesn't have, an extra bit on the resume that we handed them up front.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to have make sure whoever intends to apply is, before we can agree on the interim, is someone that hasn't applied. So I agree with you.
So hopefully with the schedule, you would know who has applied by the time you would need to make a decision for an
Okay.
interim in December.
Okay, sounds good. Otherwise, Amanda's looking pretty good as the same choice.
She's not going to talk to me.
We were not briefed for it. Mayor, I think Councilor Shevlin also has a
Oh,
question.
sorry, I'm not used to the Zoom all the time. Councilor Shevlin, I apologize. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Two things. It's a little hard to hear if you're not using your mics. So perhaps you are, maybe you could speak directly into the mayor specifically, and Councilor Cunningham, just a little bit hard to hear. But secondly, I was surprised at the timeline when I first saw it, that we can refer to as the blue schedule. I did not believe we would be able to complete everything we needed to do by that original timeline. So I'm very pleased to see the green timeline and support, as the mayor has said, let's be deliberate. Let's make sure we're getting all the information we need on the candidates and taking our time to make sure that we review and interview and everything we need to do. Is a huge responsibility. And so I support the green timeline. Thank you.
And Mayor, I just did want to note, I pulled up the 2026 council calendar, which of course is subject to a lot of change, but right now the meetings in January and February don't look too overly burdensome with decision-making.
Thank you.
Good. And as you'll notice on the green calendar, the first review, that's essentially the deadline for submitting applications would be December 7th. So that gives ample time to be able to say, hey, and we can get a list of interims and start looking at things and saying, hey, this way you have a decision to be able to make and have some choices maybe in December before Brian leaves. And so the job description, this will be an important piece, and I think maybe with the discussion that's happened and looking at some samples, if there's any changes to this, we can get those made before we do the profile and launch so that we have a good job description that's been approved. That's important to be a part of the process. And with the job description, there's a salary assigned and compensation assigned. And this is one of the big pieces of why we try to do some of this ahead of time. We can talk about compensation, we can talk about it in an open session because it's not specifically to a single person. And the other problem is you can't talk about it in executive session for a specific person. So we want to talk about that now so that we have that in, we can also look at it with other comparisons and say, yeah, your salary of 190 to 220 looks good, or maybe it needs to be adjusted a little bit. And then how do we do something within that salary? You don't have steps. And if we have a candidate and you have your preferred candidate selected after the final interviews, one of the things we like to do is say, you select, the council would, after having all the interviews and getting all the information, you say, here's our preferred candidate. And I'll kind of give you a step-by-step of how I like to do it. And there are various other ways as well, but you'd have your discussion, you'd come up with a preferred candidate, and we would then end executive session. There wouldn't be any decision that this is the favorite one, but I would leave, and what I've done in other places is I've gone and called that candidate and said, are you interested? Here's what the parameters are, the basic guidelines, and this is what we're looking at. Here's what the compensation would be, and here's where this would be. Does this sound like something that it would be easy to get negotiated?
I have a question. It may be that it can't be done, so I'm going to be letting the city attorney weigh in. It really would be helpful for me that each counselor be able to meet one-on-one with you directly to communicate their concerns and expectations, and as opposed to us having this general conversation. And then we can come back in a full meeting, kind of like how we've done it in the past with our facilitator on council, but I think each of us might have our own individual thoughts and concerns on that, and from that, develop the profile, including the salary, because I have no idea where that salary came from. And my question is that something that came internally? Is that something based on the current salary of our existing city manager? I just don't have enough information. And I don't know what the going rate is right now. And so those are questions I have.
Yeah, and I think this is pretty good. I think the salary is right in there where, for a city your size, close to the metropolitan area, would probably be looking at this salary. If you're in rural Oregon, in 10,000 population, this is really high, but not for where you're at. And so you've got to look at those factors too as you do that. And I guess Andrea could answer how the salary is established and currently established.
So the current salary on there is based on just a cursory view of the comparable cities that we use. And we have a historical set of comparable cities. And then also based on what our current city manager is his salary is right now as well. It's a kind of a combination.
Okay. And then back to your discussion of the one-on-ones with the profile. That is completely doable. And that would make this meeting a little shorter because then I'd say, hey, I'll just be contacting each one of you individually and we'll go through the questions, but I can talk about them a little tonight so you're prepared what kind of questions I would ask in creating the profile.
And again, I'm one opinion,
Yeah.
so, and I defer to the rest of the council, but for me, there are things that I, want to share that may be different from others.
And I've done that with the commission, the county commissioners or council before as well, where we meet individually and then we bring it together and say, here's what we've compiled. It works really well, either way. I mean, you either do it here or we do it in an individual basis and then we compile it. Whichever everybody would like to do, that works. Basically in the profile, what we ask are some questions, and dealing with compensation, how would we, number one, how dealing with the compensation, and these are things we just don't put in the profile, but we keep in the back of our head as we start looking at negotiations final on, is if the range is 190 to 220, how do we decide if they've got 10 years of experience in a city a little bigger, or maybe they're from the military and they're a full colonel and they've managed the battalion, the base essentially, and the civilian functions on the base. Is that something that then is transferable, and where does that put them in that range? Here's the minimum, and is that going to be the minimum basics, and you have extras? Maybe they have their masters, they have some certification, and things that you want to add more to. Some of the other things to talk about in compensation is you don't have a moving allowance in your current benefits. This was a new position, not a new position, but it's a new person to a position, and maybe they're going to be moving here. And what kind of costs are there for that? We're seeing moving allowances for people who come into Oregon about $20,000 at the low end. If they're in Oregon, 20,000 or less is somewhere where they're at. And it just depends on some of the communities, there's not even housing. And so how do they get housing, and what kind of conditions and requirements do you put on that? And I didn't look and see if your manager's required to reside. Okay. So some of the cities actually require their manager reside in the city, and that makes it even more of a challenge, but you don't have that. So they have a little bigger area to choose from. So you might find somebody coming from somewhere where they don't need to change housing, and you don't need the housing allowance. And so those are things to think about. How do you want to consider those? And we can ask those on an individual basis as we move forward. Some of the profile questions, and these are also questions we ask of stakeholders. And so are there some stakeholders that should be or would be good people to talk to in the community that are those that are tied to or work with the manager that would have some insights? The chamber president or the chamber director, or the COGS, or what other organizations, the school district, how do you want them brought in, and what kind of use do we have? Do we interview and talk to department heads and find out what kind of relationship they've had currently? What kind of relationship do they want to have? What are they looking for in a manager to help make them successful? And whatever you want us to ask and go, that's what we'll do. And I'll do those interviews and bring that into the profile. If you'd rather, some cities just keep it to the council. And so it's up to how you want to do this. Give you an idea of some of the questions. One of the big questions we ask is, why should somebody apply to be the manager in Wilsonville? Besides the fact that, hey, it's a job. I mean, but why should they apply, and why should they want to work here? And so hopefully we start seeing that as some of the answers from some of the candidates. What is the character traits of the ideal candidate? You've got the job description, and when you have it finished, it's kind of this black and white. Here are the things that satisfy laws and requirements for the job. These are the essential functions. These are the things that are optional, that are important functions. And essential functions are used to say, hey, these are the things that are important if somebody has a disability or something that's protected, that these are the things we have to see them be able to do. The optional ones, hey, if they have a disability or some kind of thing, they can't do that, then they can work around, and then we need to work around. But then what other traits do we want? Besides these black and white job description qualities, what other personal qualities do we expect or want in a manager and in our administrator that's going to be managing our employees and interacting with the public and the council? So how do those things fall in? And that's one of the big questions that we'll ask, and really helps narrow some of the scope to where we start looking at those characteristics as important as well as the job requirements in the job description. So, you know, how friendly do they need to be? Some cities want a manager that's going to be out front and always in the news and visiting with people all over. Some want them a little more tied to staff and interacting with the council only. You know, how and what role do you want the manager to play in Wilsonville? That's going to be a key piece. And then what are the top 5 challenges and opportunities that you have? Some of those we can find in your goals and your annual report and things like that, but it's always fun to talk to the people and see where the real sense is to some of that, and also to visit with some of the stakeholders. Where are some of those challenges and opportunities that are out there? Does a department head know that something's coming down the pike and it really hasn't hit the council or upper staff yet, that they're going to be able to bring up as well? So those are some of the things that we ask the stakeholders, and that maybe gives you some idea of what who to maybe ask or who to have on a list for us to ask and talk to. So that's where that basically lines out what we do. In the final interview process, we don't have to line out all of that yet. We'll do that as we get closer and we know the number of candidates. But it's nice to have known right now that you do want to have a public meet and greet, or maybe you don't. Do you want to have more than one panel? Some cities are using 3 panels, which makes it a real challenge for staff and facilitating and making sure we get people ushered to the right panel at the right time as we're moving candidates around. Typically we recommend 2, but some are using 3 to get more input. And we'll put those will be there, and we'll use those as we get further along. Other things that they've done in the interviews, the final interviews, is we've had a tour where staff or somebody takes like several candidates at once around on a tour of the city, and that person then comes back and reports to the council how the tour went. You know, what kind of questions were asked? What did they feel when they were, you know, they'll have 2 or 3 candidates with them. You know, how did they interact? What did you see in that kind of a basis? One of the other things that's fun to do sometimes and just think about is have a dinner or a meal with all the candidates and the council and department heads, and see how they interact. Sometimes the personality.
Well, meals right now are up in the air.
Yeah, and that is one with the Ethics Commission.
We can
and the
invite
changes.
the Ethics Commission along, I guess. Maybe that-
Throw that one out, because that one has kind of reached a spot where it's not doable unless everybody brings their own sack lunch. Yeah, that's one that's always fun. Finding an opportunity to put the candidates in a position where they're not going to be in their interview mode and putting on the face that they think everybody wants to see. Let's see, we try to think and be creative of opportunities to make the candidates be themselves and interact. And that's an important piece, I think, to try to work into. The meet and greet kind of helps sometimes. It gets, if there's enough people there and opportunities to interact and visit around, it may get to a point where, hey, we're starting to see what they're really like. So,
Question on the stakeholder meetings, you said you've seen 2 and sometimes 3.
for the panels, the interview
For the
panels.
panel, excuse me. Have you noticed any markable difference between the two? From an objective point of view, did it benefit more having that third, or was it a wash? Or
In one that I had 3, it was detrimental because we had the department heads and staff in one panel all by themselves. And then the community leaders were in another panel, and then the city council was another panel. The results ended up with the city council and the community leaders saying, this is our candidate. The department heads came back and said, none of them are any good. If you hire this one, I'm leaving. You better not hire this one. They assassinated every single one of the candidates. So what we did was we went back and we did 2 panels. And we mixed the department heads with the community leaders and interviewed again. And we brought in another candidate, but he ended up not showing up. So we only interviewed one person. And so we had a little more time. And the council actually said, no time limit on the interviews. We're going to say that if the department heads and stakeholders, that other panel, needs more time to get down into the details, go for it. And it took an extra half an hour, 45 minutes for them to come and finish their process with the candidate. They came back and said, yes, we agree with you now. It's softened. Having the community leaders there softened some of the department heads that were a little more protective of their department, or a little more looking for a perfect person to be in the position, I think. And they looked for every flaw they could find. And we ended up getting to a point where, hey, let's look at who's the best.
okay. Councilor Shevlin.
Thank you. The process sounds very thorough, and I'm really pleased and excited hearing what we're hearing today. My question, and I apologize if you already covered this, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, as far as the questions that we will be asking the candidates specifically, will you help us formulate those? We'll know who's going to ask specific questions. How does that come about?
We have a library of city manager questions to ask, and we can bring those in and say, here's some suggested ones. Through the stakeholder interviews and interaction with council members, if we do those individually or as a group, we'll get some question ideas as well to pull in. But we also open it up. Hey, any questions that anybody else wants to add, we can add in. We do want to make sure we satisfy HR and the attorney that we're not asking questions that aren't legal questions to ask, because there are some of those. Some of those questions people really want to know sometimes, but you can't ask them. And so we'll make sure and kind of keep that under control. And that's the reason why we do have prepared questions. But clarification questions and delving deeper into those questions, we strongly recommend and encourage that. And sometimes we'll even, some of the questions I ask in the semifinalist interview, I'll put in for the final interview as well. just to see if there's consistency, number one. They're talking to me, a consultant, and then when they get in front of the counselor, they're going to say something different. Or, did I misinterpret the answer to the question and something like that. So, yeah, we can help you with questions. I'm more than happy. That's part of what we do. So,
Thank you.
we've even had staff and council suggest questions, kind of say, I want to ask something about like this, and we'll craft something and put something together to try to reach that. So I guess the first question then is, how do you want to do the interviews or the process of answering the questions for the stakeholders? Would you like me to interview each one of you separately? I can do that. We can do that over Zoom and find times to do that. We can do it as a group. If there's some things the group wants to discuss and then have the individual interviews as well, we can do that.
Council President Barry.
Thank you. I just wanted to halfway step back the previous conversation. I really like the idea of doing the panels, but also doing like the informal tour where you can see how people are interacting with one another.
Yeah, and depending on the number of candidates, sometimes that's going to put us into a two-day final interview process, which, hey, you want to do it right. And if it takes 2 days to have the candidates here and meet and greet and do tours and get it through, that's better. The more information we can get you on the candidates, the better the decision you'll have.
So I think going back to the point you were on of process for counselor interviews, I would be interested in doing individual interviews and then coming back together as a group for kind of a final, putting all the ideas together in the goulash and figuring out what's good.
Okay.
Do you think that's something we could do in between now and our October 20th meeting, right? That's our next meeting?
Well, if there's Zoom, I think we'll have more flexibility.
Sure.
So.
And then that way we'd be able to maybe bring some information back for work session on the 20th. Is that too quick?
Possibly. I'm going to Utah to go to my first football game since college, and it's homecoming, and BYU's playing Utah, the ultimate rival game in the nation, and that's on the 18th. So,
Well, we don't want to screw up that. So.
I'm supposed to be going to see my grandson and daughter, but I'm really looking forward to the game. But so the 20th might be a little fast, but we can make it work because I can do the interviews no matter where I'm at, and do that process. And Monday night on the 20th, I can be in the corner in their apartment and be at your meeting.
So we also have the meeting on November 3rd, which gives a little bit more time, I think. And then we could do the work session where you could talk about the goulash and then potentially go to the public meeting after that to approve.
Yeah. And what we could do is I could do those interviews and put together a first draft, essentially, of the profile. And that would give you some ability to look at it and talking points and be able to say, yeah, this we like, or no, this one we don't, and mesh some more in and see how that.
The other thought process, thank you for giving that date, is it would be helpful for me personally if we have a full council. And we will, in theory, have a full council by November 3rd. And so that would feel better to me to have a full input. Maybe you can have a separate meeting with that new member, whoever it may be. You can kind of educate and we can have them participate.
And that's a really great idea, since they'll be coming in partway through the process, to keep them, they're not behind as much if they start and you do that profile on the 3rd.
So what do you need from us today for marching forward until this next time?
If everybody's happy with the individual, then I will meet with you individually. We'll set up some times, and if those questions that I kind of read out, think about those and be ready. The one thing that would be nice tonight, or maybe this would be something that you could provide in those individual interviews or provide staff, is stakeholders. Where do you want to go with stakeholders?
So I can leave you with my thoughts. And maybe it doesn't work well with more than 2 groups. But I think we have done well historically with community members participating. I think 1 sitting in the room.
So Mayor, I think when we talk about stakeholders, we're not talking about the interviews. We're talking about.
I understand.
Okay, just making sure.
I understand that. But I want, from my view, is we have a group that's focused on businesses here, maybe led by the chamber. Staff, and the 3rd being community members that are not otherwise business related, because business, and we can somehow fit in where the school district and the other stakeholders are in that group intermixed. But to me, that's the range of folks that I think the city manager has to deal with on a daily basis, and I would value their input. I mean, I think it adds to that transparency. I mean, that's my thought. But if we have to do it in 2 groups, having those people be a part of that would be important from my perspective. So,
yeah, having some of them that are interviewed for the profile development, and then some of those same people being in the interview panels is good, because they're connected and they've kind of been in the process a little bit, so they're not jumping into an interview process and not knowing what's going on. That's a good piece. Maybe not all of those stakeholders will be in the interview panels, though, because we'll probably have more. Okay. So if I could get a list, and contact information of what would be good people to interview and talk to about the profile, and we can provide samples of previous profiles so they have an idea of what we do and the questions, and spend about 15-20 minutes on each person, and longer with council members, of course, but just kind of get an idea of where and what they think, what are those extra pieces of the manager.
So I just chatted with Amanda, and that you guys would be able to share the list of stakeholders that you think Richard should interview in your one-on-one interviews with him. And then as long as Richard doesn't share that information with any other counselors, then it still meets the requirements of not having a serial discussion.
sounds good.
We can do that. Great.
Okay.
Yeah, and so then as you reach out and schedule those one-on-one meetings, can we get the list of questions that you offered here tonight and a reminder for that stakeholder deal so that we can each be prepared? That'd be perfect.
Good idea. Thank you.
While they're writing down the notes, we are looking at the council calendar for November 3rd. Our work session's pretty tight. So how much time would you all like to devote to this topic in work session so we make sure we can accommodate it?
Could you educate us now what is anticipated in the work session on that date?
So work session on that date is sewer and stormwater utility rates update, 2026 legislative agenda, and the administrative warrants.
Okay. How much of that is needed hard deadline we have to deal with at that meeting?
I don't know.
Could we check?
Yeah.
Because this is a priority on top of a city councilor, in my view.
Right.
So I don't know if it's.
Yeah, and what we would need to know is, so for example, if you all need 30 minutes versus an hour, that makes a big difference on how much we need to move off the work session.
Would you potentially have more information after your first interviews with Richard?
That would help.
And then we'll
because I'm
keep
not
an
going to be
eye
able
on the
to guess
schedule.
right now.
Okay.
Yeah. we'll look at the schedule, we'll see how much time is scheduled for those other items already, and if there are any hard deadlines for those. And then once you have your meetings with Richard, you might have a better idea of how much more time you might need at a work session.
And maybe you guys might have a pretty good idea after hearing all of our input, because we won't be able to hear each other's input, but you guys can all hear it, and then maybe you'll have an idea of how long that conversation might need to take.
Okay.
So we trust you.
Yeah, and if we may say, oh, okay, it's all the same, and it'd be perfect, but yeah.
Oh, Council President Barry.
Actually, I was just going to say what Councilor Cunningham just said. I think that the consultant might have a really good idea of how much time we might need for the November 3rd discussion.
Sounds good. So it sounds like a great idea all around. So thank you for making time for us individually.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Anything else for the good of the order?
And if I can I'll send you some availability times, and then we can start matching.
I will help schedule that for you.
Okay, sounds good. So we're adjourned at 4 p.m.
Right on time.
Wonderful.
Thank you.